course, the most important is that what are the main concerns? What is the main concern so far a day before the elections?
First of all, it's an election carried out in a situation which is very extraordinary. I have done many election observations throughout the years, and I have never actually come to a country which has so many challenges and at the same time carrying out an election. If we look at Ukraine from our perspective, it's a country, first of all, which have part of the country illegally annexed by Russia, Crimea. You have a warlike situation in the east, in the Donbas region. You have hundreds of thousands of IDPs in the country, and you have a very tough economic situation for the country as a whole. And on top of that, you have issues regarding necessary reforms that needs to take place, fighting corruption. And on top of that, again, you have a widespread politic fatigue amongst people. People are quite tired of politics because they have been disappointed. On the other hand, we see a situation where we feel winds of change and that there's many people we meet throughout the country that have quite big hopes of this election, that it will actually change something. So we think this is an extremely important election, and probably the most important election in Europe in the near future. So it has a wider implication than, of course, just for Ukraine itself. It has an implication for the whole of Europe. And that's why this is such an important election. When we are looking at concerns from our perspective, there are many, of course. Carrying out an election under such difficult circumstances raises a lot of issues for us. Of course, we regret the fact that many millions of Ukrainians cannot actually vote because of the illegal annexation, because of the warlike situation. But we also encourage the Ukrainian authorities to do their best to reach out to all those hundreds of thousands who is internally displaced in the country. We are quite pleased with what we see in the preparations for the elections, because we see many good people doing a good job. We have had meeting with the chairman of the Central Election Commission and Ministry of Interior, and we see that they are doing a good job, as we saw also in the presidential election in May. But there's a lot of concerns, many regarding security.
What are the precise concerns, and if you talk about security, where?
Yes, I mean, normally when we come for election observations, security is just one of many minor concerns. In this situation here in Ukraine, those are very closely connected. On the one hand, the ability to carry out the elections in a free and democratic way. On the other hand, security issues. It's not just the security issue regarding the east of the country, but it's also about intimidation of candidates. It's reports of potential threats against polling station, against the elections as such. I was myself in Kharkiv the last week, and when I had a meeting with the governor and the security service, they revealed that they have actually seized weapons on several occasions and actually carried out operations against groups who prepared to disturb the elections. But we also have reports of this kind from different parts of the country, and this is of course a little bit concerning.
How about the elections in the area which is not under the Ukrainian government control, and without Crimea and without part of Donbas, how these elections could be assessed, like that so many people haven't been voted? We're talking about
Yes.
millions.
Of course, from our perspective, it's regrettable. We think, of course, that when you call for a parliamentary election, it should be free and open for all the citizens of Ukraine to be able to take part in that. Now, this is reality. We are not making the choice when to carry out parliamentary elections or not. It's called by the Ukrainian side, and we have been invited as observers, and we can only observe in the places where it's practically possible. We can note that it looks like in the Donbas region that actually elections looks like they can carry through in more districts than in the presidential election in May. However, we know that first after 8 o'clock tomorrow evening, because it fluctuates the number of election districts. But of course, this is reality. We can only be where it's safe for us to observe.
How far your observers can go, especially we really understand in the Donbas, it's a different part of the territory, it's not under control, and the other, you can have their elections. How you describe how you choose this borderline?
No, I mean it's a matter of dialogue concerning the security situation. We are certainly looking at the opportunity to go into the government-controlled areas in the Donetsk area, for example, and observe elections there as well.
And how about the people who there are displaced people and the people who have an opportunity just to go to another place to vote.
Yes.
How you assess, what is your assessment of the situation? Do they really have a chance,
practically
to go and vote? And how it was done, were they encouraged, what is the system?
It has two parts when I look upon this issue. One is if there is a legal basis for them actually to be able to vote, not being in their hometowns and close to their normal polling station. And in that part, it looks like the election commission and the government have done its part and providing easier opportunities for them to register and vote on other places. The other part is more concerning whether there is enough mobilization of these voters. Here I was encouraged in Kharkiv the last week because they actually went out with campaigning especially destined for the IDPs in radio and TV commercials, etc., to get them to vote. But if you think about the situation being an IDP, of course there's a lot of other concerns than just thinking about voting. For many of them, the situation is really bad, and maybe they mainly focus on providing for their families and facing up to the coming winter and trying to live a decent life.
But how easy it is? What would be your idea? Is it really an easy procedure for them to re-register and vote? Because for a while before in Ukraine, it was pretty hard for people who are moving to that place to register.
We will conclude our assumption of this, and that will be a part of our final statement on Monday, exactly how we look at all these parts. Because it has two parts. One is the ability to register and actually practically vote. The other part is whether the society have tried to reach out to them to help them to understand their abilities to vote and how it's perceived.
How about Crimea?
Yes.
In general, the fact that a lot of people in Crimea wouldn't participate, which is more or less clear,
yes,
in these elections, how it would make the parliament representative?
That is, of course, extremely concerning and regrettable. There is specific groups, for example, the Crimean Tatars and others, whose voices might not be heard because of this present situation. As I understand, a few Crimean Tatars, for example, have been offered to run for seats for other parties because otherwise their voice would not be there at all. But as I understand in the dialogue with the chairman of the Central Election Commission, seats will be empty in the Rada, both from Crimea as well as from the areas where it will not be able to carry out the elections in the east. And that will be up for by-elections later when the situation so permits.
Are there an opportunity for the people from Crimea to travel and to vote, for instance, in Kherson and the regions nearby?
Yes, it should be possible to do like that. But it's a question of whether how easy it would be for them to actually travel, and how motivated they will feel to actually do that. But that's part of those discussions we have had. But it's mainly up to your Central Election Commission.
Is there any, international experience in these cases where there is no real access? Are there any opportunities in this situation? Paper voting, mailing, or any other opportunities?
Of course, I don't, in my personal reference, can look back on such experience. But if the election process would be even further developed, and we don't have that situation today, not even in Sweden or other countries in Europe, but later on I think the election processes will be much more simplified. We are not there yet, but in the future I think it will be possible to vote through electronic ID cards and vote through computer, etc., but we are not there yet.
And regarding the general, maybe political situation, the law on the election has been changed, and there was some criticism on that because, the lists are still not open. So, what are also the concern, not about the security, but about the precise cases of the having the most transparent election as possible in general in the country?
I mean, here we are facing two different perspectives. On one hand, I think, also as a senior and long-term member of parliament, I think normally a transparent and good system needs to have very clear rules way beyond an election. So the rules should be set quite long time before an election. Here, due to the extraordinary circumstances in this country, there has been a will to change even the election law, even this very last week before the election. That is, of course, not optimal. I mean, for many, it's better if all the rules and all the legislation and all the procedures are set long time ahead of an election and not changing the rules even in the last minute.
We know that it's very important to observe the situation during the election day, but a lot of things, as it was always in Ukraine and not just in Ukraine, depends on what is there before. So what is the situation with the equal access of the candidates to the media, with the candidates from different parties, and so what would be this preliminary concern on the access and equal representation of the candidates all over the country?
Of course, this is part of the conclusions we will make on Monday, but I can say as much as of course, election is not determined on the election day. That is actually determined in a very long campaigning. It concerns issues regarding the ability for equal opportunities to come out in media. It includes ability for different parties to campaign. It also includes not being intimidated and threatened during the campaign. So here's a number of different concerns we have, and we will conclude them and have them in our final report. But having that said, under these extraordinary circumstances, we also see a lot of good people and a lot of good efforts in this country, even though these extraordinary circumstances, that they are preparing for a good election as far as it's possible.
And also, there were also issues with particularly majority votes. We have this complicated system. There was an issue with the list, and the issue was a majority. In particular, when there was the cases to bribe the people, when the people who are, famous and rich can have better access. Do you think there is an issue of this majority vote in Ukraine in this situation when the money and power and the name makes a huge difference on the election day?
This is something we certainly observe, and we are concerned about, that there is so-called bought candidates. this is a very tricky issue to deal with. Because even if legislation is in place, even if law enforcement in there, many of these things take place in the dark. It's very hard to actually get at it. I normally say in situations like this that kind of both candidates is something that a society only can prevent if there's a very much developed democratic culture. It's not just about law and law enforcement, it's also about a democratic culture where this phenomenon would not be acceptable. Because it's very hard to see actually the moment where somebody is bribed or somebody is bought or those agreement is taking place. So I think this is part of a healthy democratic culture that do not accept those phenomena.
And you know, like for years we've been following the election here, and the days when it happening, there were always, also even for international observers, you know, you would look particularly different kinds of violation. You know, if there would be this so-called carousel which used to happen, or if there would be something with people coming from the region, or like, you know, different kinds of small things you look because there is a risk of falsification or violation. Are there any things you're looking in particular, some practices which may be necessary to address?
In this country you already performed one election this year, and now I think when we look at those who will perform this election, I think it was a pretty good election in May. Now, as I understand, about half of the officials are changed in this process, but still there's an institutional memory which is quite fresh on how to carry this out. So I expect that the process will go quite smooth. What we will look, especially, I mean, we have a procedure where we actually look at all parts of the actual election. So we will not look at one specific thing, we will look at very many different things. And we don't just go into a process and look at only this. We have a very well-developed and well-tested system where we are observing many parts, and if there's something going wrong, we will find it.
For international audience especially, we're curious, so what is the major difference between election 2014 and the previous one, you know, the ones which been like 2012, or like the previous one?
There is a few things that we are, reflecting upon. Where did all the voters who actually voted for the party of region, where do they find their new home? Will there be a lot of people actually wanting to vote at this time? Will there be enough mobilization? Will there be will it be the fresh start for Ukraine as many hopes? We see that many prominent people, also from civil society, is this time running for office, which we find quite interesting. So there's so many things, but it is a historic election, and probably the most important election in Europe.
And surely still, there would be a so-called election in Donbas on the 2nd of November. Mm. What can you tell on that?
That is nothing we will actually be involved in. We are coming here on the invitation of the Ukrainian government, and even if they would invite us to Donbas to observe the elections, we would not accept that, because we are of course here on the invitation of the government of Ukraine. But I will tell you something which is quite extraordinary, which we have never done before. Given that there's 2 to 3 million Ukrainians in Russia, and I was in Russia a couple of weeks ago and had a dialogue with your mission there, your embassy in Moscow, and there is some concerns of the ability for the Ukrainians in Russia, which is not a small number of people. We have decided for the first time in the history of this organization to actually send election observers to Russia to observe the Ukrainian election.
Was this mission accepted by the Russian government?
Actually, this is not to Russia to decide. Our observers are accredited by the Ukrainian government, and they have the ability to observe voting on all the polling stations that the Ukraine have. So at the moment our election observer land, they are actually flying out from here quite soon. They have been here on briefings. They are from here flying to Moscow. And when they will tomorrow enter the Ukrainian embassy to observe the elections there, which will be thousands and thousands of Ukrainians voting there, they will be welcomed by the Ukrainian side, because they are officially accredited even to be on your embassy in Moscow.
Okay. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I speak too much.
No, it's fine. I mean,